Back to Civil Discourse Now. I'm Mark Small.
And I'm Paul Ogden.
We are here today with our guests Pat Andrews and Jeff Cox. Pat, what is your blog?
EnoughIndy.com.
And Jeff, your contact?
My blog is No Boxes Allowed with dashes in between the words, .blogspot.com. My law firm is J.R. Cox Law. Find it at jrcoxlawllc.com or call me at 797-7273. And we got the book coming out next year on the Battle of Java Sea.
And we'll be looking forward to that. And we've been talking today about tax incentive districts.
Tax Increment Finance districts. TIF.
It's TIF. Tax Increment Finance districts.
Never make the host look silly.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no, that's quite all right.
People can't help it. I mean,
Oh, that's cute. Right. Indianapolis, the first TIF was brought in Indiana in like 1975. Well, what's the oldest TIF here in the city?
Oh, I don't know.
Because as far as I could tell, we really didn't have any in the city until like the 90s.
That would have been Circle Center.
That might be. Circle Center Mall is one of the earliest, if not the earliest.
And California had TIFs. California, which now is really in bad financial shape.
But not in so bad financial shape that they can't pay for high-speed rail to nowhere.
Well, we won't go into that.
That's another show.
But they're in their financial situation in part because of TIFs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not sure that I would say that. They're in high... I don't know that that's the whole story.
No,
because they're in bad financial straits because of decisions like spending hundreds of millions of dollars on high-speed rail that goes nowhere. It's not just the TIFs. The TIFs probably not even the majority of it.
Well, these things all contribute, and I think that they're trying to roll back anything they can roll back to get more revenue to the government services.
And here we're just getting hooked on TIFs.
Well, it's almost like you get the feeling it's a feeding frenzy. Because people think a TIF is newfound money. It's not hurting anybody. Mm-hmm. So why can't I have a TIF?
Yeah,
why can't you have a TIF? And you have a TIF.
I do want a TIF right around my house.
There you go.
The Indianapolis Star, I believe, came out in favor of this particular project. Mm-hmm. And they had some misinformation in the editorial, did they not?
They continue the myths that are unfounded. The myth that the base
stays the same regardless.
Yeah, that the money that's flowing to the taxing units today will continue to flow to the taxing units for as long as that TIF exists, and that's just not true. A lot of our TIFs, that base has dropped to zero. So all that promise was broken.
And the base drops because property values have gone down.
Well, that's part of it.
What are some other
well, you have to look at the form. There's a form they fill out. The idea is that the TIF must be able to collect as much money next year as it collected this year. Now, if the TIF is a localized area of disinvestment, that would cause the base to drop. That means if the TIF is not doing what it was promised it would do, make everything better. So if the TIF is an underperforming TIF, it's going to eat into the base just because it was a bad decision to set it up in the first place.
Yeah, and so as an example, they were wanting to set a TIF up, and I don't know if they did, around Busch Stadium, which is on West 16th Street.
Yes, and that's the second expansion of the downtown TIF, and I haven't mapped out that footprint, but looking at its map, it's humongous too.
And that's not an area that's readily amenable to people necessarily, because there are a lot of vacant car lots out there, a lot of industrial buildings that are abandoned. It's not something, and it's not very close to downtown.
Well, it's fairly close, actually. Drive in. You're almost in downtown when you're by Busch Stadium.
Well, that's about...
Well, if you go down Indiana Avenue...
Let me back it all up again. Why these areas? And that's one of the things this TIF Study Commission also revealed, was that we don't have a master plan. What are the neediest areas in Marion County? What are the ones
The
that
east
could
side.
the best?
far
Well,
east
it's
side.
always where you live, right? I mean, wherever. But
Where's that?
there should be some master plan.
Yeah.
You should be saying we need to go into the Busch Stadium area, 16th Street, with a TIF because it obviously, from this county-wide perspective, it is one of the neediest areas for redevelopment.
They don't care
That might
about
be.
anything outside of downtown. I mean,
Yeah.
that's been apparent for some time.
In other words, there should be urban planning, an overall urban plan for metropolitan Indianapolis.
For economic development.
Well, I
Right
think
now we have a land use plan for, it's called the comprehensive plan that involved a lot of public input to develop, but there's nothing like that for economic development. So they're shooting from the hip, and they're doing just because they said so. I say so, so therefore it is true.
well, I think it should be more what you'd call guidelines rather than an actual plan. That
Well, it
you
would be a
enforce.
guideline
Yeah.
plan, yes.
Well, at least
But
something.
yeah, something.
You
Something.
talk about the expansion of the downtown TIF. Why would they call it an expansion as opposed to a new TIF? Is there some kind of angle they're
Yes,
working
there is
there?
an angle. They are saying that the resources of the downtown TIF could be used sort of as collateral to help sell the bonds,
Okay.
so that if, say, the Mass Ave TIF turns out to be a lemon like others have, that they could always siphon more money away from.
Gives them more flexibility.
Well, no, the bond buyers would be more enthused about buying the Mass Ave TIF bonds if they felt there was a backup resource.
Why not make everything downtown TIF?
I think they pretty much have.
If anybody gets a chance, if you're interested in tax increment finance districts, I got it. There is a writer for the Chicago Reader. The Reader is like a newspaper in Chicago. It's a weekly.
Hence the term Chicago Reader.
Yeah, I know, but it's
Weekly
the Reader
Reader.
is like, when I lived up there, it was like people read that a lot because there was a lot of stuff in there that wasn't carried in the two daily newspapers. And I spoke to him about TIFs a year ago, before you were on the show last time. And he said, Indianapolis is doing this after what we've gone through, because he was talking about
Heard that before.
what a disaster it was up there. And I said, well, you have no idea how screwed up the city is here. And then I described to him the Pacers, and he said, no. I said, seriously, we built the stadium for them, we finance it, we give them all the income from it, and we're giving them $8 or $9 million a year.
Yeah.
And he said, no,
To run the place.
come on, you're kidding me. And so his point, though, on TIFs was, look at what's happened to Chicago. Other cities should look at how, okay, maybe 1 out of 10 of these works, but for the most part, they don't. And I would say what is a much more prudent approach to development in areas like this would be saying, let's look at our overall budget for the city. Let's develop a plan for if we have impacted areas of the city, how do we get these areas rejuvenated? What do we do? And don't create some artificial fix. That becomes, and this is my thing that I blogged on this morning, becomes kind of a fund that the mayor can use to patch up any deficits as he's leaving office, which that's kind of what Richie Daley did in Chicago. He was trying to make an illusion that the balance...
Junior or senior?
There was no junior.
Okay, wait a second.
It's Richie Daley is the son.
Okay.
And that's my... Yeah, because Richard Daley... They call him
Richard and Richie. Okay.
Richard was the elder. Richie is the guy that just left office a couple years ago. But anytime you give a politician access to funds with which that politician can create the illusion that he or she has balanced the budget as that person is going out the door, that's a bad thing.
Yeah, we have a structural deficit, that's for sure. In looking at some of the other states, municipalities, and how they handle TIFs and what rules they have that would be different from Indiana, there's a couple that are interesting. One place, and I can't remember off the top of my head, one place you could only set up a TIF for the footprint of the project. If it couldn't support itself, then it wasn't
Meant to be.
it wasn't going to be. And the other interesting thing is some places put in a 5% of assessed value cap. So we're twice that now, much less adding 6 new TIFs to the mix. So, and that seems prudent. 5% of your property tax stuff is kind of pulled aside and used for development in specific areas.
Now, you talked about an alternative being tax abatements being an option
Tax
to try.
abatements are additional incentives.
Right. And explain how that works. They normally go over a 10-year period?
They are flexible, and the rules just got really flexible by the state legislature, although I don't think we're using the full extent of them yet. They can be anywhere from 3 years to 10 years. They can be 100% of the property tax bill for 10 years now.
Forgiveness, or
Yeah.
not forgiveness. You don't have to
It is forgive. Yeah, you don't have to pay
Yeah.
your property tax bill for 10 years.
That's kind of like what we did with United Airlines at the airport, isn't it?
Yeah, that worked out pretty well.
I mean,
Don't get me started with the
because
airport.
United Airlines is no longer here in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, see, that's why I learned stuff about TIF. I live in Decatur Township. 1,000 of our acres in Decatur are airport property now, and part of the airport. You know, there's hundreds of acres, at least, if not thousands, in Wayne Township. And we were talking earlier, but in Warren Township, the Naval Air Station,
Naval Air Warfare
Weapons
Center.
thank you.
Raytheon.
And now, they were part of the airport too.
yeah, and
United
that's
TIF.
all the way on the other side of town from the
true.
airport.
And there's a spot up in Lawrence also, which is the northeast, and Indianapolis is a whole county, so we're huge. But and United left. Now the bondholders on that building, that's hit the news lately because the airport's trying to stiff them on the bonds because they haven't asked for enough rent or lease payments from the tenants of the building to pay what needs to get paid for bills. So there's nothing left over for the bondholders, and the airport is offering them 10 cents on the dollar. And they are saying, you are inept at charging the appropriate prices. And that's exactly what the airport, another show, you must have me back because the airport is up to no good. And I'm beside myself, and I don't want to get into that now. But
We didn't need a new airport. I'm sorry.
we've got that.
Well, we kind of did.
I didn't see anything wrong with the other airport.
Neither did I. We needed more gates, and then the airlines left.
But the TIF and the United Maintenance Facility, that's a whole different kettle of fish than the new terminal. The new terminal is surviving itself quite well. They're making money hand over fist at the airport.
Yeah.
And that would be a different show also, but it's like a lot further drive. It's as
It is a
far
lot
to get.
further.
Oh, it's much closer.
Well,
It
to
takes me
you.
5 minutes. I love it.
Well,
You're
I think the new airport
I gotta get
serves the
something out of it.
passengers better than the old one does because it used to be
Oh,
at the old
to hell
airport
with that.
you'd have to taxi for a half hour
Well,
once you landed to get to a gate, and then
That's
there was
just
no
a happy
room for anything.
circumstance. Don't confuse the airport with anyone who thinks their customer is the flying public. Their customer is the airlines.
Yeah.
You know.
We're at the end of the show. Pat, thanks very much for once again being on the show to discuss tips.
Nice, thank you.
Jeff, thanks for coming on to be a guest once again on our show in the discussion of tips. Personally, I'm against them. I know you think that and there should be a lot of restriction on them, and they can function.
There should be
in some ways.
some daylight
Oh, I think there should be a lot of daylight.
disclosure, and then we can
Daylight.
decide whether they're good or not.
Yeah, Paul, I don't know what your position is.
I would agree with whatever Pat is saying because she's always right on these issues.
Jeff?
I tend to agree that the TIFs have gone too far, and we need to rein them in.
Thanks very much for watching this week on Civil Discourse Now. I'm Mark Small.
I'm Paul Ogden.
We'll see you next week.
Oh, buddy in the fortress.
Wow.
Matt?